Hello everybody, my name's Pete Cook and I work here in Taiwan, in Taichung, just teaching grade ones, quantum mechanics and relativity. Why on earth would I be doing that? Well, I'm going to take you on a journey, a story of reality, delusion and nonsense, a story that you live in. Now, if I look in any science book or mathematics book, anywhere on the earth, I just see information. If I look in a science book, I see a chapter on magnetism, a chapter on solar system, animals or plants, no relationship between them. It's like reading a book and there's no story. So why on earth are we teaching a book with no story? There is a story. There's only one story, and that story is the self-assembly of the universe. You are part of that story, so you must follow the natural rules that the whole universe gets things done by. Now, we live in a very complex world, but the universe always does things the same way. A simple set of rules that generate diverse outcomes which interact with each other and create complexity. And if you try looking in that complexity to find any answers, you'll never find them. But if you just go back to the beginning and look at the rules, you'll find the answers. So let's go on a journey. This is how we teach the children. Here's the story. I must go right back to the beginning. The Big Bang. Everything must start from nothing, and everything must be able to go back to nothing unless something holds it apart. The universe holding itself in existence. It's very easy to explain to the children, if I've got 0 and I go this way plus 1 and this way minus 1, I've got something that can go back to 0 and can come from 0. All children can understand that. It's just a concept. But as we'll see, the universe is not made of substance, just relationships. So why don't we teach relationships? Let's start at the beginning. If I go right back to the Big Bang, the first thing that separates out is general relativity, the rules of gravity, where particles only behave as an analog system. It's so weak, it couldn't possibly ever have an effect on one particle against another. The rules of particles as they behave individually, quantum mechanics, they couldn't be more different. The difference between these two is very hard to find in books. I've only found it once, and that was in a book by Frank Close, The Cosmic Onion. And here's the number. How much stronger is gravity than electromagnetism? Here's the number. 10 and 40 zeros. I can't think of anything more different than that. But if it wasn't like that, we wouldn't exist, and neither would the solar system. Isn't that a good reason to be so different? Let's show you how it works. Very easy to teach the children. I just use a simple diagram like this. I can see a distortion here with something with a mass which is distorting this. Now, if I start with particles which are spread out like this, they're not generating any distortion. This we'll call space-time. But if something allows those particles to get a bit closer together, they start a distortion. The particles are creating the distortion. The distortion is holding the particles together. It's two separate things, creating itself. Now you're going to hear me say again and again, it doesn't matter what it is. It's just rules. And eventually, I get something like this. This is how stars form. But as you can see, the bigger the distortion, the more stuff falls in. It generates more of itself ad infinitum. Well, that would be a problem if these light particles didn't start to repel and stop. That generates volume, a thing, a shape, a pattern. And wherever you see patterns in the universe, patterns denote meaning. Something's happening. The universe makes itself as it goes along. And it always wants to generate greater complexity. There's a complexity gradient. That's what the universe is doing. If I just say, from a universal perspective, rather than a human perspective, what the universe is doing, it must be right. It's just doing it. It cannot be a human reason. Now, if I've got something like this, if I have enough particles, this distortion will overcome this repulsion and I just get a black hole. But the universe always has another trick to continue up the complexity gradient. And the trick it's going to use here is that if two positive charges get together, they stick and release energy. They stick because of another force waiting to carry the universe up its complexity gradient, the strong nuclear force. And that has a partner, the weak nuclear force. And as you'll see, the universe gets things done by using partnerships. So why don't we teach that? And why don't we put all the subjects that you can think of and teach in schools and link them, put them all together? There's only one story and everything's part of the same story. So what are we doing? Having universities with a physics department, mathematics department, a chemistry department, languages, if it's all the same story. Here's a very nice article by a very good English mathematician, Marcus de Saussure. He's quite open-minded, and he's saying here exactly the same thing. As he goes around Oxford University, everybody's separated. People in the astronomy department have never been in the mathematics department. But if it's all the same story, it's all related. And if the universe is only made of relationships, not substance, we need to think again. We need to teach the relationships. If I look inside an electron for any substance, there's nothing there. There's no volume. It's just a negative charge. If I look inside a quark, there's no volume, but a relationship between quarks gives the proton, which does have volume. And then a relationship between the proton and the electron gives me an atom. It gives something. Now, if I just start to teach us relationships to children, I must use visual prompts. The human brain learns visually first. So let's use that in our teaching. If I show you something like this, magnets repelling. Remember, it doesn't matter what it is. If I get two protons, it doesn't matter what they are. But if they have a relationship where they generate volume, the rule is that they repel. That rule generates the volume, what we call substance, a thing, out of no thing. All children can understand that because they can see it here. It's very simple. So let's start with simplicity every time, in everything that we teach. And always teach the same story. Now, let's go back to the Big Bang, where I don't have any objects in space. I've just got these clouds of hydrogen, nothing else. There are no things. But as that hydrogen falls together, and distorts space-time. Starts to make stars. I get the first things. I get uncertainty, generating a certainty, a thing. That thing is in equilibrium, the energy from the strong nuclear force holding that star up. And it's always trying to go back to zero. It's trying to collapse into a black hole. Now, in the middle of that star, it's forming elements. And the elements are going to take us the next step on our journey up the complexity gradient. Now, when you teach elements in the school, you can't just teach them, oh, this makes this, and we use this element to make bicycles, and we use aluminium to make aeroplanes. It's part of the story. And it was discovered by looking at patterns. Patterns denote meaning, mathematical patterns. So all of mathematics needs to be part of this story. Now, let's continue on our journey up the complexity gradient. Because I've now got elements, I've got atoms with different masses. That star is going to explode in a supernova and create uncertainty again. But every time I get uncertainty, it generates the next certainty. And out of that comes a solar system. The different masses, generating all the different objects I get in a solar system. The small ones, all high density little moons. The big ones, all low density. And the biggest one, the lowest density. That must be in the middle. Now the universe always does things the same way. Simple rules. And I need some simple rules now, which are going to turn my remnants of a supernova, rubble, into a clock. The solar system is a clock. Your watch counts the movements of the solar system. So how on earth can rubble form itself into a clock? That's the story, and it's a wonderful story to tell children. Well, as things begin to orbit, I get iteration. It's repeating itself. Now imagine three objects, and one affecting the other two. It slows that one down every time it goes past and speeds this one up. I start to get negotiation, give and take. And I can see, it's easy to teach that rule to children. Pulls this one, it pulls this one, until it all starts to balance. If it doesn't balance, if there's imbalance anywhere in the universe, I get a reaction. There's an electromagnetic imbalance, balancing itself. I just get a reaction. Doesn't matter what it is, there will be a reaction. And as you'll see, that happens in people too. This mathematics here is perturbation theory. Now this comes from the mathematician, French mathematician, Laplace. And there are two bodies here, there's a minus sign here, a difference between them. And every time I get an iteration, it gets a bit smaller, and a bit smaller, and a bit smaller, until that imbalance doesn't matter anymore. It's still there, but it's too small to matter. And later I'm going to show you that that is very, very important for human beings to live in societies. I call it the mathematics of fairness. Now, if I want to progress up the complexity gradient, and continue with my story, I need something that's going to come out of the solar system and all those different masses. And that's going to be places like the Earth, where I'm going to get chemistry. But for chemistry to take place, you need a medium. That is going to be water. Things dissolve in water, the oceans and the rocks. The rocks slowly will dissolve. Anything in the rocks which will go into the ocean goes into the ocean. Now it's very easy to show this to children. If I just put some little crystals into water, the thing, the object, the crystal, gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's just a colour. Now there's no gradient of colour, gravitational, stronger colour at the bottom. That's now spread into single atoms, quantum-sized units. Now this is the real difference between gravitational scales and quantum mechanics. Quantum. Each bit a perfect mathematical amount. And it must have a solvent. That's why life must start in water. And out of that, I can now get mathematics. The mathematics is waiting in the molecules. So why do we teach that? We find the mathematics. We find pi, a treasure, waiting to be discovered. So why don't we teach it like that? Now, if I have my quantum-sized units, they'll do everything mathematically. If I let the water evaporate, I get crystals, beautiful mathematical patterns, which you can show the children. Symmetry. It's there in the universe. But we don't teach it like that. We teach it as a dry subject in books. That's nonsense, and that nonsense has to stop. Well, here in Taichung, we've stopped it. We've been teaching like this for a long time, and the children love it because they can understand it. It has meaning. We can't teach anything in isolation. This is Marcus de Soto's. It's all the same story. Now, if I want to progress up a complexity gradient, I need something more than crystals. I can see the mathematics here. The children can all see the universe doing mathematics coming out of the molecules. But if I've got lots of different molecules in water, I can now make gradients, electromagnetic gradients, each one a bit stronger than the last. Now the children are very used to looking at gravitational gradients, the water cycle. I need some energy to lift that water up and gravity to pull it back down. That's a gravitational cycle. Well, here's an electromagnetic one, and I can only get it by dissolving molecules in water and allowing them to assemble themselves in a gradient. All children can understand that. Now, if I look anywhere in a biology book, I'm going to find the simplicity right back at the beginning here in the rules. And that's going to show up in anything which is common in all organisms. The use of glucose to generate energy. The Krebs cycle. All aerobic organisms use the same cycle. It's just a gradient. As long as I get back to the same place, and to feed it, I use glycolysis, glucose, and it drops into this. It's very easy to show this by using something like this. The children look at something, a quantized gradient. They can see there's a gradient. Doesn't matter if I've got something that goes against the gradient, as long as it comes back, it's pieces, each bit quantized. That's the real difference. Life works with individual particles, 2 electrons in photosynthesis. 2 electrons. You can't have more accurate than that. The universe working at quantum level with individual particles, that is perfect precision. And that's why, if we ever want perfect precision, we'll have to grow parts for computers bottom up instead of top down. That's how the universe works at its finest level. That's what life is. And we should teach that to children. Photosynthesis, it's just mathematics. If you do it like this and get them to count all the molecules and count them, there always must be correct mathematics. And mathematics, chemistry, physics, all needs to be part of the same story. especially for young children. Now I teach this to children in grade 1. They can all recognise the symmetry of this cube of salt. They can all recognise the mathematics here. Later, people need to specialise in particular subjects because it becomes so complex, but they must never forget that it's all part of this story. And if I continue up the story, I'm going to see patterns, the same patterns again and again. Patterns like this, male and female, two manifestations of the same thing. North and south in Magnus, two manifestations of the same thing. E equals mc squared. I don't know what E is, or M, but equals tells you they're the same thing. That's what's important. The relationship between male and female. I can't have females without males. I can't have males without females. Bilateral body patterns. I can't have left. Left generates right. Right generates left. Very easy to teach with a Mobius strip. And you can put lots of things on each side of it and get the children to run their fingers through it like that. Male and female, north and south. Electromagnetism generates more of itself. Light. If we continue up here, I get to behaviour. Now this is what's really important. I'm including people's behaviour in this part of the story. There has been for a long time this idea that somehow we're supernatural because we can stand back and look at this. But as you'll see, we're just following rules. Animals, their behaviour is rules, just rules. This strange mating behaviour doesn't matter what it is, as long as it gets passed on. This strange behaviour means that this DNA gets passed on. Doesn't matter what it is. And we do the same thing. So if you're including people in this story, children are always extremely interested. If I put information in the right order and start at the beginning, something like this, fish, and I must put all the information here. The science does itself in the children's heads. You have a validation system in your head, and that tells you that jigsaws do not fit together by chance. So if I see something like that, it does the science by itself. That's how we should be teaching. And that's exactly how we teach here. We look at things like this, cells just living together. This is not an animal, it's just colonies of cells, 4 different ones, living together. And the behaviour needed to create existence. The universe creates the conditions it needs to exist. Rule number 1. Rule number 2, it always generates the conditions needed to take the next step up a complexity gradient. Just 2 rules that show how the whole universe is working. Now, I said that we are working just by rules. And if I go back to the beginning, there'll be simple rules. Now, if you just look at yourselves and everything around you, it's all evidence of how this works. There's nothing you can think of that doesn't work like this. So if I look at the common behaviour of all people, that is going to tell me what the rules are. Cultural rules are the same as this strange mating behaviour. It's just people following these 2 rules which generate our existence. Copy and conform. We copy each other so that we live together in groups and do the same things. And if we did not do that, if we tried to exist on the African savannah as individuals, we would have just been gobbled up by the environment. We have no natural weapons, so we must copy and conform. That makes you cooperate. You don't need many rules, but you'll see that all around you every day. Fashion. People carrying small dogs everywhere now. 10 years ago, there were no small dogs. We just copy each other. Now, the universe is also statistical. It doesn't mean that everybody has to do it. It just means the majority have to do it. You need a small number of individuals that will introduce change. But you can't have too much change. That's the way evolution works. That's the way everything works. Strange behaviour. All wearing the same clothes, competing with each other. Now, these two rules are what make us different from Neanderthals. Competition shows up in every society on the earth. We cannot resist. Now, behaviour is just something that makes you behave without thought processes. You must do it. Test it. Next time you're driving, you always get an instant reaction inside your body. If somebody pulls out in front of you, somebody does something, you always think they're wrong and I'm right. And you have no choice over that. Later you can change your mind. But you have no choice over that initial reaction. That generates behaviour. Now, anywhere in the universe where you find unfairness in human societies, that generates a reaction. You can hold that unfairness, that imbalance, but you need authority, power, and violence. And that's how the world has been for the last many thousand years. Moral codes didn't do it for us. Europe had a moral code, fantastic, but it didn't work. If you look at European history, there's no horror too great that wasn't done. Genocides, concentration camps, world wars, organized slavery, religious persecution, organized torture of children. Didn't work because it wasn't natural. We have to obey these natural rules. But if we copy and conform, now remember I said it doesn't matter what it is. We'll copy and conform to anything. We generate delusion that we validate. Remember the jigsaw? If we're creating the jigsaw as we go along, as we grow up and become adults, we're putting the pieces in and we can see they all fit together in our own society. And we believe any nonsense. Very, very strange ceremonial behaviour, customs. We love them. It's part of humanity. But it's a delusion that only your group of people find valid. When other groups look at it, it's invalid. It's exactly what it is. Just strange rule following. And children, they often tell you the truth. The king is wearing no clothes. So we've known about this for a long time, but we haven't had the science. These two rules, curiosity, natural curiosity, and competition, if you put them together, you get a feedback loop. And anywhere in the universe you get a feedback loop. You get something that generates more of itself. Stars, typhoons. And this is what we need to do for children. And because all children are different, they're going to be curious and compete about different things. You have to watch your own children to see which things they pick up, what they're interested in. And then let them go naturally. If you use authority and tell them, you narrow the mind down, make them do this and make them do this and make them do this. The mind just concentrates on pleasing you. It doesn't learn to explore and compete with itself. And all people do that. They don't climb mountains for money. They'll compete, and it doesn't matter what it is, throwing the lump of metal. Is that really what we're all about? Yes. We're not so intelligent as we think. We're a ship of fools who ride on the coattails of a few intelligent individuals. And to prove that to you, there's There's no relationship whatsoever between our social behaviour and the tools that we make when these two, competition and curiosity, get into a feedback loop. That's easy to show. Think of any moments in history. The First World War, at the same time we come up with quantum mechanics and relativity. What's the rest of the population doing? Organised slaughter for its own sake. And at the end of it, they all go home. And because it was done on the battlefield, we didn't smash the country to pieces. It didn't work. The moral codes didn't work. In the same time that man is walking on the moon, the same country is spraying Agent Orange over peasants in Vietnam and kills 3 million of them before it realizes it's a mistake. There's no correlation between our social behavior and what happens when this gets going. Our tool making is nothing better. And if you just leave children to do what they really want to do, and then provide all the equipment and tools they need to do it, they'll compete with themselves. When we're using authority, the brain shuts down and just does mechanical tasks to get paid. There are many companies that already know this. Now, I want to keep this short and sweet. The whole story, well, you can see whatever you're teaching, it fits in with this somewhere. But you must start with this first and just keep branching off. But you must come back to this. There's nothing else. So, what I want you to do is think about whatever you're teaching. Think about your own children. This is what wins every time. You leave them to find out what they are good at. And they will naturally compete and be curious to see how much better they can get. Now we need things like language and thought. Everything that you can think of, evolution of language. Language generates thought. You think in language and thought generates more language. Again, it's another feedback loop. So that's what we need to do, is to tear ourselves away from the past and look at the relationships that create the universe. Thanks. We'll see you next time. And if you want some more of this, it's the Hydrogen to Human project, and it's coming your way very soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.